Thank you for listening to Dharma Talk. My name is Matthew Sokolov, and I'm a teacher here at One Mind Dharma. And just a few announcements that kind of logistical pieces or announcements we make at the beginning of every episode. First, you can visit oneminddharma.com/talk to learn how to subscribe via email. We have our podcast available in podcast stores like the Apple Podcast Store, Google Play, Google Podcasts, Spotify, etc. You can also watch on YouTube if that's your preferred method and you'd like to watch me. If you're listening on audio, then you can just get the audio version. If you learn better or pay attention better by seeing the speaker, then you can absolutely visit YouTube. And the couple other things I just want to announce are that our online classes are going strong. We have our Wednesday night class every Wednesday at 4 p.m. We are hoping to add another class here in the future. And what this class looks like, because I know a lot of people have emailed me with questions and I don't talk about it much, is it's just a really small group, usually anywhere from 4 to 10 people. Sometimes we have more, but it's rare. And we offer a brief check-in where everybody who wishes to can check in, say where they're from, which is beautiful because we have people from all over the world, tell us about their practice in a sentence or two. And then we have a meditation, a guided practice, a short talk, and some time for interaction and discussion. And it's been really beautiful to have people with all of these different experiences come to group and share about their perspective and what they've learned and are learning, and create an online community. All of that is at class.oneminddharma.com. It's donation based. There's no registration fee. We don't take a credit card. It's just purely donation based, much as this podcast is. And the last thing I want to mention is that I have a new book that's set to come out on September 17th. So depending on when you're listening to this, less than a month away, or maybe it already came out. And it's called A Mindfulness for Beginners Journal, Prompts and Practices for Living in the Moment. And I'm going to hold up a copy for those of you that are watching the video. For those of you that are listening on audio, picture me holding up a book. You can check out the book at oneminddharma.com/journal. And it's really cool. It was the same publisher, Althea Press, and they came to me with this idea, and I've talked about journaling and writing as part of practice before on the blog and in the podcast. So it was something I felt pretty excited about. And it has a lot of, it's hard to show the video. It has a lot of space for writing, different kind of prompts and readings. There's meditations, there's quotes, there's affirmations, and they just did a beautiful job. It's always amazing to me. I work with the team and the editing team to put together the actual writing. And then they put together just this beautiful book that's, I almost feel like it's a little bit too nice to write in, but I hope others don't feel like that. And it goes through different sections and it's aimed for beginners, but I also hope it would be useful to anyone who does have a practice or just wants kind of a guided way through the way that I practice and have found useful both myself and with my students. oneminddharma.com/journal. You can get a pre-order copy. It's available in paperback and will be available, I believe, via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a few others that I can't remember. So with that, let's get into today's topic. And I will put this book over here. If you see me looking off to the side, I'm looking at my notes. I always introduce the topic like you didn't see the title of the video or the podcast episode, but I want to talk about spiritual bypass. And the reason's actually kind of funny. I was scrolling through my blog, the One Mind Dharma blog, I don't even remember for what reason, maybe looking to see if I'd already written about something. I was going to write about vulnerability, and I came across an article about spiritual bypass. And I have had it on my list of things to talk about on Dharma Talk for a while. And we've been off for a while. As many of you know, we have a baby coming, our first baby coming on on October 17th. The due date is October 17th. And then we've been traveling for my sister's wedding and a few more things, but we're back here now. So this has been a topic that I wanted to talk about, and I want to just start with what is spiritual bypass. It may be a term with which you're already familiar. It may be something completely new to you. Maybe you can pick up what it means just by the actual phrase. But I'm going to use an actual definition. We can use spiritual transcendence to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness. And I just lost it. Before we have fully faced and made peace with it. We can use spiritual transcendence to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness before we have fully faced and made peace with it. And then we tend to use absolute truth to disparage or dismiss relative human needs, feelings, psychological problems, relational difficulties, and developmental deficits. So this is kind of I don't know if I would call not convoluted, because I think it's actually very accurate, but it's a little bit of a long definition that could be hard to understand. It comes from John Wellwood, who actually coined the term spiritual bypass. But I think the key pieces here are we use spiritual transcendence to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness before we've made peace with it. And then we can use the absolute truth to kind of dismiss experience or feelings, problems, deficits. So there's kind of two pieces here that are saying the same thing, and that's that we use our spiritual path or spiritual principles to remove ourselves or distance ourselves from the reality that we're experiencing. I'll give some examples. Actually, most of this episode will be examples and different ways we do it. But at the core of spiritual bypassing is aversion, this principle in Buddhism, which is one of the three poisons, one of the chief ways that suffering is caused or created in our experience. The spiritual bypass has a sense of dishonesty. It's inauthentic. And we know it when we hear it in others sometimes, and I'll go into that in a moment. What happens when we kind of push past something is we don't intimately know the experience. We aren't able to investigate it and look at it with mindfulness and with curiosity. Like I already said, it's a form of aversion, of getting rid of something. A great kind of generic example is when people say things like, I'm hungry, but I guess it's okay since there's tons of kids who have nothing to eat today. Or I didn't sleep well, but I guess that's okay because there's people who are working 20-hour shifts. Can see how we're, and that's not super spiritual necessarily, and we'll talk about what that is, but it's this idea that we're not honoring our experience because we're looking at some bigger absolute truth, and that's not an absolute truth as far as Buddhism goes, but we're looking at a bigger truth or the bigger picture. Yes, there are kids who are hungry in the world, probably in our own towns. Yes, there are people who sleep way less than we do. And we can hold that while still honoring where we are, that we're uncomfortable or experiencing discomfort with our situation. So the spiritual bypassing is saying, oh, I'm not looking at this suffering of whatever kind because this or because that. We can see just how this is kind of pulling us away from suffering. It's not compassionate. When we think of everything we know about compassion, just the root of the word, the etymology, compassio, to suffer with, that when we use this kind of practice of bypassing our suffering, we're turning away from it. We're kind of ignoring it or denying it. So there's a few kind of common ways that I've experienced spiritual bypassing and seen it in students and those around me. One is ultimate truth, and this is one that's I think pretty specific, but I've seen almost exclusively in Dharma communities. And people may do it in other traditions or religions, that I just frankly don't spend a lot of my time with, so I may be unaware. But this turning towards ultimate truth, and in Buddhism there's two truths. One's not better, one's not higher. There's just two separate truths that come together. The conventional truth and the ultimate truth. Sometimes called conventional reality and ultimate reality. The conventional reality is that I'm sitting here recording this Dharma talk and you're sitting there listening to it. I'm a person with a vocal box and a practice sitting here spewing my opinions and experience. And you're a person sitting there listening. Now the ultimate truth, of course, is that I'm just a collection of atoms and molecules and cell parts and cells that come together to form bones and sinew and tendons and everything electrical impulses in the brain and synapses, eyes, that comes together to form all of these things that we call a human. And all of these atoms and different parts are moving and changing, and there is no real me or real you. And the sounds that I'm making that you experience as words are just waves that are made by my vocal cord that we've arbitrarily decided matter or mean something. We give them symbolism or meaning. And they're coming through. I'm not even going to touch how the microphone records it and it comes through your speaker because I don't understand that at all. But so on and so forth. There's these two truths. The conventional being like what we use. My name's Matthew. I'm giving a talk. The ultimate being just a collection of atoms, ever changing, no self, empty. But it's weird to refer to someone like my wife, Elizabeth, as a collection of atoms and molecules and energy that I call Elizabeth. That's rather obnoxious. So we use the conventional truth to work our way through reality. One way that we can spiritually bypass is by just turning towards this absolute truth. I hear it, I've heard a few phrases and said a few phrases myself that really come to mind. It's all just emptiness anyways. We're experiencing something painful and someone says, let's say I lost someone in my life. Someone passed away, someone died. And I say, oh, it's okay. Like it's all just, they were empty and impermanent. I'm just empty and impermanent. And it's the nature of things. That's true. No one can argue with that as far as the Dharma teachings go. But it doesn't really address the fact of how are you feeling. So we can see how it kind of, it's all, in this case and in many cases, it's intellectualizing rather than feeling. Tara Brach talks about this a lot, that even when we turn toward our emotional experience or the physical experience we're having in the body, we often kind of try to think about it or understand it or analyze or somehow intellectualize. And this can take us out of the actual experience and where the wisdom comes. I'm in pain, but life is full of suffering. It's the noble truth. Yes, life is full of suffering, but that doesn't change the fact that we can benefit from tuning into our suffering. So it's turning towards absolute truth, this kind of spiritual intellectualism is a way of bypassing. The second one is one that's much more common that I see, and that's optimism. And I realize as that comes out of my mouth can sound negative or pessimistic, I guess. I'm not saying optimism's bad or all optimism is spiritual bypass or anything of the sort, but we can use it just as we can use this teaching of the two truths in an unhealthy or unskillful way that actually causes more suffering and doesn't lessen it. We're talking specifically about going through difficulties or experiencing some discomfort or pain. And we've all heard this. Maybe some of us, myself included, have said this. I'm just trying to stay positive. I'm just thinking positive thoughts. Now, there are research studies to suggest that trying to stay somewhat positive or not engage with the unpleasant thoughts can be beneficial, that we can actually do things to increase positive thinking, and positive thinking, in theory, can increase happiness and decrease stress, and can actually have physical effects on the body. However, that doesn't mean we only need to think positive and just ignore the negative or I don't love the terms positive and negative, but what I would call unpleasant, or the pain and the pleasure. Everything's not all good, and everything's also not all bad, or all pleasant or unpleasant, or all painful or pleasurable. So we can think positive and kind of focus the energy of the mind towards growth and moving forward, but we also need to tune into the unpleasantness and begin to work with it. To say I'm just going to focus on something else when we're experiencing something unpleasant is the opposite of compassion. To start with compassion, we need to honor where we're at, and then we can make a wise decision, perhaps, that, okay, I'm going to focus on taking action to get out of this situation. But just blindly thinking positive without really honoring where we're at is just bypassing it. The third one is one that is often called other places on the internet and in things I've read, victimization. And I don't love, I have a little bit of an aversion to that term, and I call this one storytelling. A little bit different. Obviously there are people and experiences and events that cause pain, sometimes a lot of trauma even, really charged, really intense and activating. And we can benefit from allowing ourselves to be the victim, in a sense, allowing ourselves to admit that we're hurt, allowing ourselves to seek help, allowing ourselves to be held by others, allowing ourselves to feel compassion from other people when we're not able to feel it or offer it to ourselves. Where this falls into spiritual bypassing is in the storytelling, and that's why I identify this one as storytelling, is when we begin talking about the other person and what they did, and we're absolutely not focusing on how it made us feel. So, oh, they did this and they did that and they did blah, blah. It's kind of a different one, but what we're doing is we're not honoring what we're experiencing. Even just to say, this is what they did and I feel angry is much more honest and much more useful than just focusing and kind of watering that seed of resentment. And of course, this varies from individual to individual, and this is kind of a touchy one, I think. If someone stepped on our toe accidentally, it's a different kind of healing process than if we've experienced something that the mind or the body or nervous system found traumatic. Often that period of healing doesn't come in minutes or days or even weeks. It can take years and years. So recognizing that, at the same time, what I would say is holding both of these pieces of admitting that we're hurt or saying that we're hurt, and not just focusing on others. When we get into that storytelling and we're not even connected with anything other than anger, we're kind of moving away from the true experience of what happened. Comparison. So this is the starving kids one, or the people not sleeping one, comparing our suffering to the suffering of another. And there are times that, again, this is useful. There are many times in recent weeks that I've felt rather unpleasant or uncomfortable. My wife is almost 8 months pregnant, and she is often uncomfortable. So there are often times that I just bite my tongue. It's nothing major. I can have compassion for myself, and it's not needed because her discomfort is greater, and I'd rather show up for her. Now, that's not to say that that's bypassing. To me, where it becomes, or in my experience at least, where it becomes unhealthy or unskillful is when we are completely not honoring where we're at. And I don't think comparison is super useful in general. The Buddha actually, when talking about conceit, said that thinking that you're more than someone is conceit, thinking that you're less than someone is conceit, and thinking that you're equal to someone is conceit. Stop thinking about yourself and comparing it to another or to their suffering. If you're experiencing pain or discomfort, you're experiencing pain and discomfort. Maybe that calls for just some self-compassion. You don't need to complain about it. Maybe it does call for letting someone know or asking for some support, or maybe just letting it out and telling the story of how you're hurt without falling into just the storytelling or victimization. The next one, our penultimate, I love that word, is one that I've seen myself, and it can come across rather judgmental. I didn't find it on any lists or anything, and I couldn't think of a better term for it. I've written about it before, and I call it the same thing, is false spirituality. And I know that that's not always fair for us to judge how where someone is along their path or in their psyche or in their heart. So I can only speak for myself, and I'll just speak for myself with this, and I've done it. I think I learned it a lot in 12-step. A lot of sponsors or people would say it, where it's someone caused me harm and it's okay, I forgive them, when really I haven't. This false kind of I've already worked through it. It doesn't have to just be spirituality, of course. It can be we can do it in therapy. I've already worked through this with my therapist. I'm over it. Another way I hear it in Dharma circles and with students is, this person, whether it's a person we personally know, someone we see on TV, whatever it is, someone we read about, they really rub me the wrong way or have caused me a lot of pain, but I just keep sending them metta and it's all good. And the truth is, in my experience, that when I say that, it's often not true. It's often some sort of brushing off. If someone really has caused me a great amount of harm, sending metta to them a couple times a week for a month is not going to make it all better, especially in the beginning. So we need to just honor where we're at along the path. Let go of spiritual materialism. There's nothing shameful about still having resentment or anger or not forgiving or feeling unsafe or being hurt or being vulnerable or being weak in a moment. These are all things we experience. We all have moments of no gratitude, of anger, of closed-mindedness. So to honor these things and not pretend that we're somewhere that we're not. The last one is one that I hesitated to put in here because I always get backlash when I talk about things like this, but I think it's important, and that's prayer. And I'm not here to argue about theism or atheism or agnosticism. I'm not here to argue about whether or not prayer is useful or good or bad or whatever. But I want to start with this. I do think that, as with all of the other forms of spiritual bypass we've been talking about, we're talking about one thing that can be used for in a skillful way or an unskillful way, perhaps. So telling a story, for example, we can tell a story to really help someone understand why we're hurt. We can use our spirituality or our growth or the path or the Dharma to really process emotions. However, we can also use both of these things in ways that aren't really honest or honoring where we're at. So prayer is just like that. And this is another one that I really learned in 12-step and didn't really work for me. And I wouldn't say was one of the reasons I left, but it's definitely something that I'm glad I've been shown ways to move past via great teachers that I've had. I've seen this in two major ways in my life. One is going back to the resentment kind of piece. When somebody causes me some sort of harm, or perceived or real, I guess I mean to say maybe someone didn't necessarily cause me harm. Maybe I just am finding myself resentful, or the response is resentful. This idea that you get where, oh, I'll pray for them, or I'll just pray about it. Now, I think this can be useful in some sense because we can focus our energy and effort on this experience. But often what happens when we pray for someone else or pray for the experience to be lifted is we're not actually tuning in intimately to what's going on. The other way I've seen it in my own life is this kind of praying for things to be different. This, I'll make it through this, but may things be different in my life. May there be more joy, or may there be less of this stress, or so many ways that it comes up. These are both ways of not honoring where we are. And I don't think that makes all prayer bad or all prayer wrong, but I do think that we need to be careful with this act of how we are balancing it with this honesty or authenticity that's called for on the path in order to work with things. Authenticity and honesty is core to this Dharma path, core to mindfulness and to meditation and to growth. It's by tuning into our experiences. It's by really being present with them that we begin to understand them, see them clearly, see the marks of existence. If we're not tuning in, of course we're not going to learn about them or work with them. With spiritual bypass, the best we can hope to do is shut ourselves off completely to something for some time, only to have it still be there when the bypassing stops working. And it does stop working. You may be able to go out in public and put on a shiny, bright face and say that you're super spiritual and you're zen with everything, and there are people suffering worse in the world than we are. But at some point it catches up to us. Maybe at night when we're going to bed, maybe while we're taking a shower, maybe while we're driving to work, in those moments of silence, those little bits of sadness or unhappiness catch up to us. So I think we can turn toward these forms of spiritual bypass as a way to go. It's kind of meta with one T, but what we can do is actually not bypass the ways that we're bypassing. We can see these kind of qualities or states or habits or behaviors and really use them as a kind of jumping off point. What's going on here? What's going on beneath when I'm saying that that person's suffering is worse than mine, I don't need to feel mine, or I'm just going to think positive thoughts. Okay, what's so unpleasant in the thinking mind right now? Is it something we can tune into with compassion? They can serve as kind of triggers for awareness, as indicators that something else is going on. So I'm just going to name the ones that I named again. And there are other ways we can bypass that I don't think everything needs to fit into a perfect category. But ultimate truth, over-optimism, storytelling, comparison, the false spirituality, and the prayer. So we can use these as kind of ways to begin to look in our own life of how we're bypassing or how we're not tuning into our experience. There are, of course, other ways we can bypass that aren't related to spirituality or kind of, that wouldn't qualify as spiritual bypassing, but are just bypassing or denying or ignoring. We take a nap or eat or use drugs or jump into our work or whatever to avoid our feelings. But these are ways that seem kind of relatively wholesome, but aren't really in the long term. They remind me of the near enemies of the heart practices. These qualities that really look like the desired qualities or responses, but aren't. They can seem wholesome on the surface, but when we dive in, they're pulling us away from truth a little bit. There's a lot of applications for spiritual bypass. We can use it in our personal lives. People are utilizing it in communities. I read an article about addressing spiritual bypass and kind of criminal justice reform and how we can use that as an understanding. I read a great article from Dr. Gomez on Huffington. I'll put the link down there. I just read it before I wrote this post on kind of racial justice and how I think it was called Spiritual Bypassing Bypasses Justice. And it was a great article. We also have a video kind of outlining that Elizabeth made years ago outlining what spiritual bypassing is. So I'll put a bunch of links down in the description or in the feed or whatever. So with that, just a few closing announcements. class.oneminddharma.com to join us for our live sitting group. oneminddharma.com/talk to learn how to subscribe in other ways. We are super asking for donations as we are hoping to make this podcast and our podcast list self-supporting here before the end of the year, and we're a little bit of a ways away. You can visit patreon.com/oneminddharma to pledge just $1 or $2 or whatever you have to offer us a month. And then you can visit oneminddharma.com/PayPal to make a one-time donation. Right now, every podcast episode we send out costs us money, and we would love to make this self-supporting. Our goal was by January 1st of 2020, so by this coming year, to make this podcast self-supporting. I think right now I should have looked before. I think right now with the emails we send out in the podcast, we are only $21 a month short. So your support greatly helps. Obviously, if you have any questions about where the money goes or how we utilize it, it's on the Patreon page. It's on oneminddharma.com/donate. And you're always welcome to reach out to me at matthew@oneminddharma.com. I'll just end by saying if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, if you have a question about meditation or about your practice that either I or Elizabeth or somebody else could answer for you, I'm always happy to offer my best suggestion or point you in the right direction. Matthew@oneminddharma.com. I answer every email I get. And remember to check out the new journal, oneminddharma.com/journal.